Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Hupp. Today, in this segment, we kick off the new year by welcoming back media scholar Nolan Higdon. He's an author, lecturer at Merrill College in the Education Department at University of California, Santa Cruz. He is a Project Censored national judge and commentator, as well as a founding member of the Critical Media Literacy Conference of the Americas. Higdon's areas of concentration include critical AI literacy, podcasting, digital culture, news media history and propaganda, and critical media literacy. His work's available at Substack, nolanhigdon.substack.com. He is the author and co-author of numerous books, including The Anatomy of Fake News, Let's Agree to Disagree, The Media and Me, Surveillance Education, United States of Distraction, and others. He is a regular source of expertise for CBS, NBC, The New York Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and of course has worked with us at Project Censored for a number of years, and also is a contributor of The Edge at the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College. Nolan Higdon, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Happy New Year, Mickey, and Happy New Year to the Project Censored universe. Appreciate being here.
It's always good to catch up with you, and I know that we're going to have a busy year writing, commenting, critiquing the things that are happening. Certainly, we're now looking at the incoming or the transitioning Trump 2.0 administration. And naturally, it was quite an interesting election in many ways. We see that the rank and file Democrats have yet to learn lessons from the past several decades regarding the outcome of that election. But let's talk a little more specifically about media, social media, and let's talk about the interesting trend of many elites in media and in big tech, Silicon Valley, really kind of coattailing and lining up in support to sort of kiss the ring of a Trump 2.0, whether fawning over him at Mar-a-Lago or in the press, or where we see outlets censoring information. We see social media outlets now moving away from fact checking, which you and I have been critical of, but we're going to talk about that today too. But let's just start with the Trump Musk love affair with Silicon Valley, and some of the bizarre things that are happening in the GOP and in the media ecosystem in general. Nolan Higdon.
Yeah, it's a really weird time. I mean, if you're old enough to remember 2024, you remember when all of these people in media and the political class were circling the wagons, calling Trump real life Hitler and saying he's having rallies and he's this fascist. And then all of a sudden in 2025, these people are lining up behind him one after one after another, whether it be the Jeff Bezos type or Tim Cook from Apple, or now Zuckerberg seems to have bent the knee to him. Earlier, of course, in late 2025, we had the Morning Joe MSNBC people. For our audience, this is what the consolidation of power looks like here. Trump won. He had a pretty impressive victory. I mean, let's not forget 4 years ago, we were all writing obituaries for this guy for January 6th and those kinds of things. Now he came back with this victory. He's got economic power, political power. He's got the media behind him. It's been quite a transition to see. But in addition to all that, I think it really reveals just the lack of principles that so many of these folks actually have. Zuckerberg said at one point thought Trump was so dangerous he had to remove him from his platform. And now Zuckerberg is changing everything about his platforms just to appease Trump and make Trump feel comfortable on it, including, moving part of his business to Texas, getting rid of the fact checking that right wingers have been critical of, adding Dana White from UFC, a major Trump supporter, to the Meta board. And so I think it's just revealed that these people always said what they thought would get them the right audience and right attention. They actually had no principles or commitment to it. I mean, I can't think of any example in history where someone went from concluding someone was Hitler, like the Morning Joe cast did, to turning around and saying, we need to build a bridge and talk with these people. I mean, it was just really an astounding display of the lack of backbone and principles by these people.
Well, what's also fascinating is we've seen, as you and I have talked about, Team Red and Team Blue media outlets, corporate media outlets that sort of preach to a particular ideological audience to guarantee certain ratings. What we saw just in the last, not even basically 2 months, is really a collapse of MSNBC as sort of as a news model. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's happening in some of the neoliberal media sphere? What what even passes for quasi-liberal corporate media, as it were.
Yeah, I did a lot of analysis of this because I thought it was one of the most interesting aspects of the election, and it's gotten very little coverage. But basically, in a nutshell, when liberal or Democratic Party voters came out of the election, I think they realized they've been bamboozled for years at this point by the very media system, right? And they were told Kamala Harris was going to win. You know, it was going to be neck and neck, and wasn't close at all. She got stomped in these so-called swing states. Prior to that, you know, they were told Joe Biden is going to win. He beat him once. He's going to do it again. He's got the soul of America. Sure, he looks tired on screen. We should see him behind the screen. He's running circles around everyone. That totally flopped with the debates, or I guess lack of debate that took place in June. So I just think time and time again, these audiences have realized that they don't have a grip on what's going on around this country if they watch Democratic or neoliberal media. And this includes things about like working class or even some communities of color or some women, particularly white women. They were told, you know, they would never vote for Trump. You know, that Puerto Rico joke was going to kill the Latinx votes for Trump. And he actually gained ground in all of these areas. It was just, I think, a undeniable display to liberal viewers that the media they're consuming is completely propagandizing them about electoral politics. And so now we've seen these huge declines in audiences. Like some primetime shows on MSNBC have lost 61% of their value. Rumor has it Rachel Maddow is taking a ginormous pay cut. We saw Chris Wallace at CNN step down after he had gotten that lucrative contract just a handful of years ago. If folks remember that, he stepped down as CNN seems to be cleaning house over there. So I think this is an exciting time for independent media. I will say that about this time period. A lot of the problematic legacy media is losing its audiences. But as we all know, as media scholars, that audience isn't going to necessarily be captured by the most trustworthy sources. There are a lot of other pernicious propaganda sources and new media that are certainly going to try and track that audience. So we'll see how that plays out in 2025.
Well, yeah, you mentioned, just party leadership in the Democratic Party sort of being oblivious to many of these things, or willfully ignorant at least. It's as if they didn't notice the Bernie Sanders campaign of 2016 at all. And they forgot entirely, apparently, that Harris didn't win any primaries. This time around, they didn't even really bother to have a primary, which leads me to something else you said, and we've talked about this before. And in fact, Project Censored, you and I and others had noted, a year or more prior to the election, that the idea that Biden was running without anybody taking stock of what anybody could witness, that there was definitely something going on, and it seemed as though the administration was definitely handling him. Turns out that we were right factually, that we've now discovered matter-of-factly that there was a concerted effort in his administration to basically conceal anything happening with him from the public, to not have him interact with media. I mean, we're talking, more than George W. Bush levels in the first year he was in office, when he was on vacation 40% of the time and gave fewer press conferences than any president in history. Biden in many ways went on eclipsing that, and it's as if we weren't supposed to notice that it was kind of an AWOL situation. And then now, once we get into the election and the election is over, now there's this hand wringing saying like, well, why didn't we know, or who didn't know, or what was going on? Can you comment on that? Because it's another example seemingly of both willful ignorance and efforts to censor or conceal vital information from the public that I believe obviously has backfired in this case in terms of how the Democrats ran the primary. Nolan Higdon.
I completely agree, but I think it even is worse than that as more of these details start to emerge. Now, you're absolutely right. It's become very clear that most people who had contact with Biden thought he was not cognitively able to hold office, let alone run for another term.
Well, except George Clooney until he changed his mind.
Yeah, so yeah, there's probably more behind that story.
Yeah, yeah, there is.
But for sure.
His
But
wife. Yeah, go ahead.
well,
Allison.
this idea that they were oblivious is something that's really been shattered as well. The campaign, so actually Biden's campaign became Harris's campaign due to the timeline, and those folks went on Pod Save America, which is a podcast I don't recommend unless you like keep listening, but it's hosted by all the old Obama staffers. And it was really interesting on that podcast because they said two things that shoot holes in this oblivious argument. One is they said their own internal data showed Biden giving up 400 electoral votes to Donald Trump, which means this whole time they were telling us Biden can win and Biden's a good candidate. Their own internal data said the opposite. And then secondarily, they pointed out in that interview that their internal data never had Harris leading Trump. So they also knew in that campaign that they weren't going to win. And this is why while they're taking money from people who rightly are afraid, people in the trans community, folks who want legal access to abortion, folks who are afraid of deportations. These vulnerable communities, they're taking money from them, and we find out they're giving it to like the Oprahs of the world and her staff and things like that. To me, it was just a total bilk. And what is the final cherry on top, in my opinion? You brought up Bernie, and so I can go through upteen examples, and we've written books about it, of the marginalization of Bernie Sanders' campaign and Bernie Sanders style politics. And then when Harris loses, all the very people who helped marginalize him in media have flipped and are all of a sudden acting like Bernie bros. You got James Carville saying, "Oh, maybe Bernie was right," and David Brooks is like, "Well, Bernie's got a point." And Joyanne Reed and Jason Johnson, that's the guy who called all the women of color who supported Bernie misfit girls from Black Island or something like that. Um, they're now saying like, yeah, the public doesn't understand. Like reform isn't going to help. We need universal health care. And it's like, you are the exact people who are fighting against the Bernie campaign and you're on the record doing it. And now these people are saying, well, maybe Bernie was right. Of course, it's 10 years later. There's been way more suffering in this country for people, especially economically. But now the media just acts like no big deal. Move on. You guys didn't see what's happening. They never have any accountability for their part in that outcome.
Well, Nolan, you and I wrote in the United States a Distraction, which was interesting. It wasn't a book about Trump. It was published in 2019, City Lights. And we carefully argued that despite that Trump was very centric, the media just couldn't turn away from him. During the 2016 campaign, he got double the free coverage that even Hillary Clinton got. Right? And we talked about CBS CEO Les Moonves, just basically having a love affair with the coverage, about how it was bad for America, but damn good for CBS kind of thing. But Trump strategically partnered with right elements. He harnessed white anxiety through far right online platforms. He continued to do that this time, except instead of just going to the right, he went on a lot of other podcasts. I mean, yeah, some of them are conservative podcasts, but he really went into that space, whereas the Democrats just really didn't think it was necessary or important to sort of get involved in. And I mean, I'm reticent to call it the new media because it just isn't in technically so many ways, but that space where so many people are, Democrats decided they weren't gonna go, hence ceding that territory for Trump to talk about, political aggrandizement and social intolerance, use aggressive rhetoric and posturing, celebrating violence, threatening immigrants, and manufacturing all kinds of threats that went completely unchallenged. What might you have to say about sort of the whole strategy regarding media? And now then we'll go back to where we are now with now all of these social media groups and even the corporate media, they're now kowtowing to Trump, Nolan Higdon.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. It was an untapped resource that the broad left in this country really wasn't using in terms of electoral politics. There's a few people like Ro Khanna, will go on Congressperson Ro Khanna will go on podcasts and things like that. But for the most part, a lot of these elected officials from the Democratic Party try and avoid that space. Bernie is probably one of the most frequent users of the space, AOC, but the rest really don't go on there. And it's a missed opportunity because this is where people are at. And Trump knows he can go in there. And that's why when the media laughed at him for like working at McDonald's or the trash thing or the stupid jokes with Theo Vaughn or the ridiculous conversations with Joe Rogan, I knew the media was wrong. I'm like, this is where people are, though. He's reaching millions of people while you guys are talking about whatever you're talking about on CNN to like 300,000 people that night. It's not drawing in the same audiences, but it also speaks to a bigger problem. This is a problem that goes back to Hillary Clinton, and it goes through Joe Biden, and it goes through Harris. The Democratic Party consistently, with its median system and establishment, tries to shove candidates down the voters' throats that come from this like corporate HR conveyor belt, where they only say the exact right thing. It's inauthentic. It's scripted. That doesn't work in podcasting. Podcasters will blow through that in no time. You got to be able to talk sometimes 1, 2, 3 hours, take any question, have some authenticity, be engaging, know different things, be aware of pop culture. And Democrats simply just aren't spitting out those people. They're spitting out like these basically AI generated automatons who say whatever it is the establishment wants them to say.
Who now I guess we'll be dealing with on platforms like Facebook and others that have now announced that they're gonna be launching, thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of bots of AI fake characters and so on. I mean, that'll give an entire new dimension to fake news and information dissemination, which we'll talk about, here later in the program. But I just wanted to at least wrap up with some of the electoral business, and sort of segue us into more conversation after the break on media. And that is that, what we wrote about before United States as a Distraction was that American political culture was becoming more and more centric regarding spectacle, and Trump coming through The Apprentice and this sort of this con man, grifter, celebrity character, with this authoritarian personality, um, he really co-opted so many different threads in American pop culture. And, we wrote about this. We said, this isn't really about Trump. It's about the role that the media has played in sort of refashioning political culture, the bread and circus culture, where the media got sucked into the Three Ring affair, and really was like part of the discussion or part of the dialogue, or made itself part of the problem, right? By rather than staying out and doing ethical journalism, asking tough questions, covering these issues, they really inserted themselves in the ring, worldwide wrestling style, as though they were going to take on Trump. And this obviously has backfired wildly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing. This isn't necessarily no, this isn't at all advocacy for Donald Trump. I'm not saying that the media needs to is victimizing him or something like that. But I do think that Trump has consistently shown that like key things he talks about a lot, like immigration, right? We saw the big explosion over immigration amongst the Republican Party over this H-1 visa issue, right? Where a lot of Trump supporters want absolutely no immigrants. Some of Trump's big donors want these visas because it's a way to get immigrant labor in.
Big,
Oftentimes
big
for
tech, cheap labor.
yeah, exactly. So that is a way the media could ask critical questions to really bring some heat on Donald Trump, to really hold him accountable to his supporters. But instead they go for these like ridiculous sensationalistic stories, right? When he gave that rally a couple nights ago, the news media all they're talking about is about like wow the same things Trump said it just didn't make sense. Trump's talking about this thing with Greenland and it's like look, the Greenland is a distraction. Like that's what Trump does. He distracts these sensationalistic topics. The immigration one, that's the one that freaks Trump out, right? That's the one. And you can see how Elon is scared right now on his platform. He's trying to distract from a discussion of immigration because he's alienated these MAGA supporters. But the media always takes the bait. They'll go for the Greenland story. They won't go for that like immigration division in any serious way. And if they're doing it, they'll do it now because it's become a spectacle. Because it's got famous people like Elon involved and Vivek and Trump. But they should have been asking those questions for the last year. That's what their job is.
Well, as we've seen Nolan Higdon, we see those questions, we see those angles often more in the independent media and the independent press rather than the legacy press. So it seems like that there's going to be a lot of work to do, reforming whatever passes for so-called mainstream media in this country. Trust in media has now dipped below that of Congress, which is really striking. It's saying something pretty extraordinary. So you mentioned before the break the division between big tech and Musk and the anti-immigrant sentiment in the Republican Party. But let's focus on another element of Musk and how some of the influence, obviously here with the visas, but also influence in terms of the whole social media realm, where Musk pretended to be this champion of free speech while he simultaneously censors and deplatforms so many people. It's even been discovered that he has fake profiles himself. Right, right. We've learned that, how he props himself up with himself through other accounts. But we just recently saw Mark Zuckerberg at Meta that spent years developing this, really kind of like Byzantine, unaccountable fact checking, sort of faction of Meta and Facebook and Instagram and so on. All just to say suddenly that now all of a sudden that Trump is coming in with Musk on his coattails, that Facebook suddenly is not going to do fact checking anymore. Interestingly, we've talked about this for ages. When we talk about fact checking, what are we talking about? The Atlantic Council, the PR wing of NATO? I mean, honestly, from some level, I'm glad we might not have to worry about Atlantic Council doing so-called fact checking at Facebook. But let's talk more about this. What's all the liberal hand wringing about right now around the now going to be absence of this so-called fact checking at Meta, and what were some problems with it in the first place?
The whole fact checking thing to me was always a fool's errand, and I think he'll probably never admit it, but I think I always got the impression from Zuckerberg, from his interviews and reading his stuff, that he always knew it was fool's errand too. I think he was pressured by elements of the Democratic Party, especially when they were taking control in 2020, to give the appearance of fact checking and basically would remove any content that would get him in hot water politically. Now, some of this stuff is easy, right? Like child pornography, I don't think it's that controversial to remove off the webpage. But then when it got into like these kind of more like vague or interpretive or subjective terms of like racism or sexism, things like that, I think he would succumb to the pressure, including removing Trump. But now Trump's back in office. The power structure has changed, and so Zuckerberg changes with it. And this is what I mean about the lack of, principles or backbone that he's going. He never believed in the fact checking. He never believed in it, but he sold it because it kept people on the platform. And this whole plan to these new policies that he's implementing, they do echo Elon Musk in terms of Zuckerberg asserted that he's for free speech, and even if 1% of if he's fact checking 1% of true content accidentally gets called false, that's too much. I happen to agree with him on that. I also happen to agree with Elon that I believe in a free speech platform. But the reality is, neither of these platforms, before Elon or whether after Elon took over X, were ever free speech platforms. They're always managed by the algorithm. The algorithm always dictates what content you do, and more importantly, don't see. And I think it's interesting in both these cases. Now that Trump's in office, they both say, well, we want to have more positive content and we want to have less politics. So you want to send more feelings of positivity in the Trump era to people, and you want to conceal whatever it is you consider politics. I would argue in a democracy, everything is theoretically political. But that aside, they're going to put this political content away, and that's management of information. Just what you were accusing them of doing from the other side during the last 4 years. And so, to me, this is just a continuation of this oligarchy power over our information structures. And I think the public continuously is making the wrong mistake in a democracy. They're trying to look for the right billionaire to bail them out. Well, this billionaire needs to buy this platform. This billionaire needs drunk Rollins. This billionaire will donate to Harris. Enough with the billionaires. The billionaires are not the solution to your problems. Democracy is. You need to use that power.
Well, Nolan, you just mentioned oligarchs, the sort of racing to find out which are the right oligarchs, right? Which ones should those be? Speaking of oligarchs, Jeff Bezos over at the Washington Post, right? Recently, there was an issue of censorship at the Washington Post with a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist who resigned from the Post after the paper refused to publish a cartoon in which Bezos was seen as one of several other billionaire oligarchs, including Musk, bowing at a statue of Donald Trump with bags of gold or money, including a fallen down Mickey Mouse representing Disney. In other words, it also had the CEO of the LA Times, the CEO of Zuckerberg is one of them too, right? He was one of the people depicted. Sam Altman was another one depicted of OpenAI. Patrick Soon-Shiong. Um, Again, a very pointed critique of how these oligarchs are all now lining up, and then the oligarch media that they own is lining up. And one of the very newspapers that is owned by one of the oligarchs bowing at Trump's feet with a bag of money, his minions at the paper say that's a step too far, and we're not gonna run that cartoon. Um, just like we saw both the LA Times and the Washington Post not endorse anybody for president because they don't wanna get involved, but now they're all lining up, as you mentioned earlier before the break. Nolan, this is again a gross example, in my view, of censorship, and it's getting called out as such. I wish it was more. Let's not forget that it was the Washington Post that said democracy dies in darkness after the 2016 election when the corporate media mea culpa because they said they failed to critically cover the 2016 campaign. Well, here we are again, rinse and repeat. Nolan Higdon, what do you make of this?
Well, I find it just again so fascinating that 8 years ago there was so much emphasis on why we need to protect the free press and we need to protect journalists. And I was attacked consistently for using the phrase fake news, even though I was just looking at the history of it. I wasn't attacking any journalists for being fake news. But here you go. This is a for example where the press needs to actually be protected. Here at this what happened at the Washington Post, but it's silence. There's a din of silence, which makes me question how committed were people actually to free press principles, or did they just see it as a good weapon against their enemy at that time, which was Donald Trump? I think this is, and Bezos is a part of that too. Bezos and his paper were very critical of Trump. Now Trump takes power and they flip on a dime. Let's not forget Bezos for, you know, stuffed the endorsement during the 2024 campaign because he probably had a sense and a feeling that Trump was going to win. And he wanted those lucrative contracts that he continues to get from the government. And he knew that, last time he brought him all kinds of trouble when Trump took office. So this time he hedged his bets and he was right. He got in terms economically and his paper goes with it. I'm not surprised. Again, it's another example, as you point out, of censorship in this country, which unfortunately a lot of people deny happens. And it's also an example of why we cannot allow the oligarchs in this country to consolidate control over the flow of information.
Yeah, well, Washington Post's editorial page editor, David Shipley, he claimed that he just disagreed with the artist's interpretation of what exactly happened that led to her resignation. And he claimed that there was already a column on the same topic and they were trying to avoid repetition. I mean, is this person who's running the editorial page that politically tone deaf or politically unaware of what's happening with the oligarchic media, with the fact that the public finds that the establishment press it now has a lower trust rating and approval rating than that of Congress, below 17%. I mean, this is kind of riveting. Yet somehow we entrust these people to know what the American people want to hear, read, and see. Let's not forget that that stunt by Bezos to prevent any kind of endorsement at the paper for the first time in a long, 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 long time, led to over 300,000 people canceling their subscriptions to that paper. As a flack moment, right? As sort of again, this is further looking at the crisis and confidence of the press. And even if you want to give Shipley the benefit of the doubt, as a business decision, this is incredibly foolish at a time like now. Nolan Higdon.
I would say it's foolish, but it's also just hypocritical. I mean, back to the Bernie thing. This is a paper that ran 16 articles on Bernie Sanders in 16 hours, and 15 of them were negative.
Yeah.
So now you don't want to be redundant, but it was okay when you were going after
Yes.
the socialists who was fighting on the behalf of working people. This is the exact type of hypocrisy here. So I personally don't buy the excuse.
Right.
And I also think if that was the reason, I think that would have been cartoonists would have been informed of it. That would have been something that you conceal. The cartoonists would know that. So I'm skeptical of that story, to say the least.
Yeah, well, again, he was hopeful that this person would reconsider that, uh, reconsider the decision, etcetera. But I mean, again, it just goes to show that these people are pretty out of touch. And this is again what you were saying earlier. One of the things that Trump did, whether you like it or not, is he went onto platforms and went into places where it at least appeared. Let's really be specific. It created the impression that he was in touch. Yet for someone of his ilk, I can think of few people who are more out of touch with what it means to be a regular ordinary person living in America in the 21st century with the great challenges that people face. I mean, let's face it, even James Carville in the Democratic Party said, "Look, the Democrats forgot and what I told them in 1992, it's the economy, stupid." And the Democrats just keep saying over and over how great it is, but it doesn't matter how theoretically great or numerically great it looks if rank and file Americans aren't seeing it. Nolan Higdon.
Exactly. That's this disconnect, and you're absolutely right. I do not mean to insinuate anyway that Trump actually has a connection to working people, but
Yes.
he does have an amazing way to read the room. And the reason why he's able to do that, I think, for in part, is because he actually goes into the room. When Trump visited that Association of Black Journalists, he had to know that he was in the firing line, but Trump took it. He handled it. He felt it's important to go into those rooms. Harris avoided stuff like that. And Democrats typically do. They either don't think they can handle it or don't think they need to. But ultimately, what it signals is they seem out of touch. Where ironically, Trump, the billionaire, seems more in touch because he's in those spaces. And I think that's the ground Democrats keep ceding. And it comes from this kind of elitist perspective. Folks will remember Chuck Schumer about 8 years ago said it's okay to lose these working class voters because every voter we lose in that rural area will pick up two more in the suburbs. One, that's totally anti working class and goes against Carville's it's the economy stupid. But two, that didn't even turn out to be true. You're also bleeding life in the suburbs as well, either to the couch or to Trump. So in both cases, they ended up ultimately being wrong.
Just, recently we saw, in the new coronation of Trump, um, Kamala Harris, took a swipe actually at Sanders, right? Saying, that he was supposed to, quote, "stand right here," although that is not your nature to just stand where you're told to stand, but just give it a try, right? That was what she said, and, he actually he actually sent back and said, "Oh, I'm impressed that you memorized that," or basically he was saying something to the effect that, he's surprised that she even bothered to remember that he was, a leading candidate in the primary, beating everybody else at the polls. Nolan Higdon.
Yeah, yeah. Bernie is that figure the neoliberals have desperately tried to get out of the party. They want to shake that New Deal, Great Society type politics, and they see Bernie as kind of this anachronistic figure, and it drives them nuts that he continues to be popular. Even while their candidate, Joe Biden, is taking flack for being old. No one's going after Bernie for being old. Bernie had a heart attack. They're still siding with him, and I'm laughing because it's just that's how popular Bernie is as compared to their candidate, and they couldn't wrap their heads around. And they tried to, do what they do best, which is virtue signal. So Harris will sign on to a bill with Sanders, and then she pulls her name from it so she can hold up the bill and signal to progressives. Remember, Hillary Clinton said, "I'm a progressive who can get things done," and she wasn't getting much done after 2016. So those kind of I'm not surprised there's that antagonistic relationship between
Right.
Bernie and the party, but I am surprised that they're not savvy enough as a party to try to tap into Bernie. I mean, nominate him for a labor position or create a Bernie Sanders bill you say are going to pass anything. They just want the guy erased.
Well, this goes back. You could go back to Nader. You could go back. I mean, the Democratic Party's been doing this for a long time, and certainly the Clintons are the ones that really helped steer the party into the neoliberal right center, where it just continues to go. Where we saw Harris campaigning more with Liz Cheney, and snubbing, Teamsters people and so forth. I mean, it was just preposterous to see the errors writ large taking place. Nolan Higdon, last minute left here. Tell folks, where can they follow your work, find your work? And maybe give us a little bit of a hint of some things that you have in store here as the Trump administration will be sworn back in later this month.
Yeah, you can catch me at nolanhigdon.substack.com. It's a free newsletter, send outs, and goes right to your email. And it's got media literacy stuff, media analysis, try to highlight the work of others as well. It's a great spot. And yeah, I'm looking forward to, continuing to watch these kind of internal media debates of MAGA and the Trump inauguration. And I'm really interested in where social media is going in this era. With the TikTok ban, we've now normalized governments being able to censor platforms. And I'm wondering how that's going to play out in the Trump era. So I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that and talking to the Project Censored Universe and you, Mickey.
Thanks so much, Nolan Higdon. We always look forward to it. I know that you'll be on with us numerous times here this year. So yet again, we wrap up another segment, but we'll have you back on here in the near future. Certainly as we come near the inauguration, I know we're going to have some special programming around that you're involved in. So we're definitely looking forward to it. Nolan Higdon, as ever, thanks for joining us on the Project Censored show today.